Hey guys, welcome back to Sleepytime Stories. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. Before we begin, please like and subscribe, dim the lights, grab your favorite pillow, snuggle in, and get cozy. Tonight, we'll drift through another gentle, slightly boring slice of history. The perfect kind of story to tuck you in. Let's slow down together. Bedtime in the year 1303. Ever tossed in bed, thinking insomnia's a modern curse? Medieval folk had sleepless nights too, but their remedies might surprise you. Prayer beads for counting breaths, hot milk with nutmeg, even sleeping priests paid to recite dull sermons. Tonight, we'll try their calmest trick, a slow, fictitious walk through a quiet monastery garden where every step is paced to your slowing heartbeat. The round earth secret. The candle flickers as the monk's quill moves across the parchment. He is not copying scripture or writing prayers. Instead, he carefully traces the curved lines of a sphere, a map of the world as he knows it. This image contradicts what many of us were taught. We grew up hearing that medieval people believed the earth was flat, that sailors feared falling off the edge of the world. But that wasn't true. The idea that people in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat is a myth. Scholars and educated people knew the earth was round. They had known for centuries. The ancient Greeks, like Pythagoras and Aristotle, had written about the earth's shape. Their works were preserved and studied in medieval monasteries and universities. Textbooks from the time described the earth's curvature. Sailors didn't worry about sailing off the edge because they knew there was no edge to sail off. So why do we still believe this myth? Part of the answer lies in the 19th century. Writers and historians of that time wanted to paint the Middle Ages as a period of ignorance. They exaggerated old stories and ignored evidence that didn't fit their narrative. They wanted to make their own era seem more enlightened by comparison. The flat earth myth was a convenient way to dismiss the past. Even Columbus's famous voyage wasn't about proving the earth was round. The debate wasn't over shape, it was over distance. Many scholars argued that the earth was too large, that sailing west to Asia would take too long. They were right, of course. Columbus underestimated the size of the earth. And if the Americas hadn't been in the way, his crew would have starved before reaching Asia. But no educated person at the time doubted the earth was a sphere. Evidence of their knowledge is everywhere if you look. Medieval scholars measured shadows to calculate the earth's circumference. They studied astronomy and understood eclipses. Globes and maps from the time show a rounded world. Even in art, kings and saints are often shown holding an orb, a symbol of their power over the earth's spherical form. The myth persists because it's simple. It fits neatly into the idea of the past as a dark, ignorant place. But the reality was more complex. People debated, questioned, and built on the knowledge they inherited. They weren't perfect. They had their own misunderstandings and superstitions, but they weren't the caricatures we sometimes imagine. Consider the monk again, bent over his work. He doesn't see himself as backward or unenlightened. He is part of a tradition of learning that stretches back to antiquity and forward into the future. He knows the earth is round. He knows it moves through space. His world is smaller than ours in some ways, but not in the way we often assume. The quill scratches softly against the parchment as he finishes the outline of the globe. Ink dries slowly in the candlelight. Outside, the night is quiet. The stars turn in their courses, just as they always have. The monk knows this. He knows the shape of the world beneath his feet. Now imagine another room, this one in a castle. where a servant fills a wooden tub with warm water. The steam rises into the air. The idea that medieval people never bathe is another myth, another oversimplification. The truth, as always, is more interesting. The quill is set down, the candle burns lower. The monk's work is done for now. But the story of what they knew and what we've forgotten they knew is just beginning. 3. Baths and misconceptions. Steam curls from a wooden tub in a castle chamber. The water carries the scent of lavender and rosemary, crushed leaves floating on its surface. A lady dips a linen cloth into the warmth, pressing it to her neck. This quiet ritual contradicts the popular image of medieval life, a time we often picture as perpetually filthy. The idea that medieval people never bathed comes more from Victorian stereotypes than historical fact. In London and Paris, public bathhouses thrived. Southwark's stews along the Thames hosted bathers well into the 1500s. Paris had 26 bathhouses by the 1300s, where people paid 2 deniers for a tub of heated water. Some even offered private rooms for wealthier clients. Monasteries kept strict wash schedules. Benedictine rules required feet washing twice a week. Clerics scrubbed their hands before meals, and infirmaries changed linens regularly. Herbal soaps mixed with sage or mint were common. Even peasant households often had a wooden trough for washing, though they used it less frequently than the wealthy. Noble families took hygiene further. They owned elaborate washing sets, silver bowls, linen towels, and scented waters. Rose petals or citrus peels steeped in the water. Inventories list washing basins among prized household items. Clean hands mattered before eating, when people often shared dishes. War and famine changed habits. When crops failed or armies marched, bathing became a low priority. Water carried illness in some sieges, making people cautious. But this wasn't a permanent state, just a response to crisis. By contrast, the Victorian era saw more fear of bathing. Doctors warned that water could unbalance the humors, and many wealthy families washed less in the 1800s than medieval nobles had. The differences between classes mattered. A peasant might rinse off in a creek weekly, while a merchant's wife soaked in a tub monthly. But the idea that people wallowed in filth for years is fiction. They cared about cleanliness within their means. Laundresses beat dirt from tunics with ashes and lye. Barbers trimmed hair and beards to reduce lice. The real shift came with plumbing. Without pipes, heating water took labor. Servants hauled buckets from wells and firewood for heating. A full bath was an event, not a daily routine. But lack of constant washing didn't mean accepting grime. People wiped faces and hands regularly, changed undergarments, and aired out bedding. The Black Death shifted attitudes. As physicians blamed miasmas, bad air for illness, some towns closed bathhouses, fearing crowds, but individuals still washed privately. Manuscript illustrations show mothers bathing children and surgeons rinsing tools in vinegar. Cleanliness adapted to circumstance, never disappearing entirely. Compare this to later centuries. The 1600s saw some nobles wear the same shirt for months, believing linen absorbed dirt. By contrast, a medieval baker might wash his arms up to the elbows daily. Flour dust demanded it. Each era had its own logic, its own balance between practicality and propriety. Castle latrines, called garderobes, drained into moats or cesspits. Though hardly modern, they show an attempt to manage waste. Servants sprinkled herbs to mask odors. In cities, laws required butchers to clean blood from streets. Efforts were uneven, but present. The myth of universal stench says more about our distance from the past than the reality. Imagine a time when soap was handmade, water hauled by hand, and cleanliness a visible sign of status. The rhythm of washing followed seasons, wealth, and necessity. Not the absence of care, but a different way of caring. Drip by drip, water falls from a rinsed cloth into the basin below. The same liquid that cleaned wounds, rinsed hair, and quenched thirst. The medieval relationship with water was complex, rarely wasted, often reused, always valued, even in darkness, a shimmer on the surface. 4. Life beyond 30. The hands gripping the smith's hammer are gnarled but strong, fingers thickened by decades of work. Each strike of metal against metal comes with a steady rhythm of experience. This man is past 60, yet here he stands, a truth that contradicts what we often hear about medieval lifespans. When people say they only live to 30, the number isn't wrong, but the meaning is. Average life expectancy calculations include the many infants who died in their first year. If you survive childhood, your chances improve dramatically. Parish records across England show bakers kneading dough at 60, widows overseeing households at 70. In Florence, guild masters passed leadership to their sons only when age stiffened their fingers too much for fine work. Skeletons tell the same story. Archaeologists find wear patterns on bones that show decades of labor. Joints worn smooth from years of walking, spines curved from lifting, teeth ground down by coarse bread. These are not the marks of short lives. In the courtyard of Durham Cathedral, graves hold monks who clearly lived past 70, their bones showing the slow changes of long years. Court documents mention elders with frequency. In 1324 Yorkshire, a land dispute involved a witness described as the old man who has worked these fields since King Henry's time. That would make him at least 60. London's tax rolls list candle makers and fishmongers practicing their trades well into what we'd call retirement age today. Agriculture required know-how accumulated over seasons. An experienced farmer could read the sky for storms, knew which fields needed rest, remembered which harvest had been poured 20 years earlier. Villages kept these people close for their memory as much as their labor. The blacksmith we started with, his value wasn't just in his muscle, but in knowing how to temper steel so it wouldn't shatter in winter. Women's lives followed similar patterns. A midwife in Norwich delivered babies for 30 years, her experience saving mothers when young practitioners might panic. Widows ran alehouses using recipes perfected over decades. Household accounts from Burgundy show a woman managing her late husband's vineyards into her 70s. Her handwriting shaky, but her calculations precise. The 30-year myth persists because numbers can mislead. When half of children died before 10, it dragged down the average. But in Normandy, a study of adult skeletons showed most lived past 50. The real danger wasn't age. It was surviving those early years. Once past the perils of infancy and childhood accidents, medieval lives often stretched to lengths we'd recognize today. Guilds had rules about aging masters. Some required members to step down at 60, but others let them continue if their skills remained. A Flemish weaver might train apprentices until his hands grew too stiff, then oversee dye purchases with his color knowledge intact. Elders arbitrated disputes in markets, remembering old prices and fair measures. Their long memories became living records. In monasteries, scribes kept working as long as their eyes allowed. One Canterbury monk's manuscript has a note about his failing sight at 73, yet 3 years later, he's still making careful entries. These weren't exceptions, they were common. What shortened most lives wasn't time, but childbirth gone wrong, a bad wound festering, or a hungry winter. Consider the carpenter who beams your roof at 50, the miller who remembers every flood since his youth, the grandmother who knows which herbs ease a fever. Their generations built cathedrals that took more years than their own lifetimes to complete. They planned knowing others would finish what they started. Now picture those hands again. Not young, but capable. The blacksmith's hammer rises and falls in the same motion he's used longer than some men lived. His breath comes a little harder now, but the iron still bends to his will. Across the workshop, an apprentice watches, learning what 60 years can teach. A tapestry begins to unfurl on a castle wall, thread catching the afternoon light. The scenes stretch back to distant horizons, each stitch placed by fingers that knew both the swiftness of youth and the patience of years. 5 colourful strongholds. Picture a castle wall, but not the cold grey stone you might expect. The original surface would have been covered in ochre red plaster, bright against the landscape. Historians now know these fortresses were far from the drab, monotonous structures we often imagine. The passage of time stripped away their vivid colours, leaving only the naked stone we see in ruins today. When you walk through a medieval castle now, you're seeing a skeleton. The walls were once coated in lime-based washes, tinted with natural pigments. Red ochre came from iron-rich clay, yellow from saffron or arsenic compounds. Wealthy nobles painted their family crest directly onto the plaster in bold primary colours. A knight riding up to such a castle would see his lord's heraldry shining from the walls. Inside, tapestries draped every available surface. These weren't just decorative. They trapped heat and softened echoes in cavernous stone halls. Inventories from English royal palaces list hundreds of tapestries, some depicting biblical scenes, others showing hunting parties or courtly romances. The famous Bayeux tapestry gives us a glimpse of this textile tradition, though its survival is rare. Most medieval textiles rotted away centuries ago. The Great Hall formed the heart of castle life. Contrary to bare stone depictions, these spaces glowed with colour. Long tables might be covered in Flemish cloth, dyed deep blue with woad. Silver candlesticks reflected light off painted ceiling beams. Chairs and chests bore intricate designs in vermilion and gold leaf. Even the floor received attention. Some castle excavations revealed traces of painted floor tiles in geometric patterns. Light transformed these spaces after dark. Beeswax candles, expensive but smokeless, illuminated the high table where nobles dined. Their golden light would dance across gilded serving platters and stained glass in window embrasures. Servants carried polished brass lamps between tables, casting moving shadows on walls that were anything but plain. Glass windows, while not as clear as modern ones, added another layer of colour. Castles of the wealthy used quarried sheets of glass set in lead frames. These often contained greenish or bluish tints from mineral impurities. When sunlight passed through, it cast coloured pools on the interior walls and floors. Stained glass in chapel windows told sacred stories through jewel-toned panels. Much of our misconception comes from preservation bias. Stone lasts, plaster flakes away, wood rots, tapestries disintegrate. The durable parts remaining create a false impression of austerity. Excavations at sites like Dover Castle revealed layers of plaster still clinging to walls in shades of red and white. At Carcassonne in France, restorers found evidence of original painted decorations showing vines and faux masonry patterns. The concept of a romantic ruin also colored our perceptions. 18th century artists often depicted castles as crumbling and moss-covered, reinforcing the idea that they'd always been that way. Gothic novelists loved describing shadowy corridors and drafty chambers. These artistic choices seeped into popular culture, overwriting the medieval reality of vibrant living spaces. Servants' areas showed color too, though more practically applied. Kitchen walls might be whitewashed to reflect candlelight for late-night food preparation. Stable blocks often had red doors, a color believed to ward off evil spirits. Even garderobes, medieval toilets, sometimes featured painted interior walls, proving aesthetics reached every corner of castle life. Visiting nobles carried their own splash of color. Traveling tapestries and furnishings accompanied important guests. A diplomatic visit might see additional hangings installed temporarily to impress foreign delegates. Records show kings sometimes ordered entire rooms repainted before hosting important meetings. Seasonal changes brought different decorations. At Christmas, evergreen boughs and red-berried holly adorned halls. Easter might see white linen draped over statues and altars. Harvest celebrations featured sheaves of golden wheat and baskets of colorful autumn fruits as centerpieces. The castle's appearance changed with the liturgical calendar. Sieges stripped away these comforts. When fortresses prepared for attack, defenders removed tapestries to prevent fire hazards. Valuable furniture went into storage. What remained were bare walls that later generations would assume represented normal conditions. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War describe this transformation from luxurious residence to stark defensive structure. Modern conservation work continues uncovering lost colors. Ultraviolet light reveals faded paint invisible to the naked eye. Microscopic analysis identifies pigment ingredients, verdigris for green, lapis lazuli for blue. At Cras de Chevalier in Syria, restorers discovered intricate painted decorations that had been hidden for centuries under layers of soot and whitewash. This color wasn't just about vanity. Bright walls lifted spirits during long winters. Heraldic displays reinforced social order and loyalty. Rich decorations demonstrated the Lord's power to both subjects and rivals. Every hue served a purpose beyond mere decoration in these complex political spaces. As the sun sets on our understanding of medieval castles, another world comes into view. One where a lord's physician tends his herb garden. The painted walls surrounding them hold traces of knowledge about to be applied. 6. Herbs and honey. The mortar scrapes against the stone bowl as the monk crushes willow bark into fine powder. This simple act holds more healing wisdom than we might expect. Medieval medicine often gets dismissed as superstition, but beneath the strange potions and astrological charts lay practical knowledge that sometimes work better than we acknowledge. Monastic infirmaries served as the hospitals of their day. Healthy monks took turns caring for the sick, following strict rules about cleanliness. They changed bedding regularly and washed patients with herb-infused water. Honey, known for its antibacterial properties, dressed wounds. Some monastic records show recovery rates that rivaled later periods. A Norwich Priory's accounts list honey purchases alongside bandages and suture needles, basic but effective tools. Islamic medical texts circulated in European libraries, translated from Arabic. Surgeons studied diagrams of the human body and charts showing how to set bones. The 13th century physician Gilbertus Anglicus described a pain-relieving salve containing opium poppy. While they didn't understand germ theory, they recognized infection. Some texts advise boiling instruments before use, though not consistently. Humoral theory dominated medical thinking, but didn't prevent practical solutions. Doctors believed balancing 4 bodily fluids was key to health, but also prescribed treatments that worked despite faulty reasoning. A fever might be treated with cooling cucumbers, which actually hydrate patients. Willow bark tea containing salicylic acid, aspirin's ancestor, relieved pain regardless of humoral explanation. Experience sometimes outweighed theory. Childbirth relied heavily on women's knowledge. Midwives passed down techniques through generations. They used birthing stools positioned to help gravity and knew to turn babies presenting feet first. Herbal teas stimulated contractions, while others slowed bleeding afterward. Mortality remained high, but not from lack of skill. Poor nutrition and infection caused most deaths, not incorrect procedures. Surgery happened more often than we assume. Trained practitioners set broken bones using traction, a method still used today. They understood tourniquets stopped bleeding during amputations. One French text describes removing cataracts by gently pushing the clouded lens aside with a needle. Crude by modern standards, but showing careful observation. Hospitals took varied approaches. Some focused on prayer over treatment. Others employed practical physicians. The Hôtel Dieu in Paris had separate wards for different illnesses, an early form of triage. Nurses washed patients regularly and changed straw bedding often. Records show they understood contagion, isolating those with fever or skin diseases. The herbal tradition held genuine remedies among the oddities. Garlic treated wounds. We now know it has antimicrobial properties. Mint settled upset stomachs. Still used today for nausea. St. John's wort, now studied as an antidepressant, featured in medieval preparations for melancholy. Trial and error identified what worked, even without knowing why. Apothecaries stocked hundreds of ingredients. Their shops contained dried lavender for headaches, chamomile for sleep, and fennel for digestion, all still used in alternative medicine. Some prescriptions combined effective herbs with superstition, like adder's tongue fern for snake bites. The useful elements persisted while nonsense faded. Medical licensing existed in some cities. Florence required physicians to pass examinations by the 1300s. Barber surgeons apprenticed for years before practicing independently. Charlatans faced fines for pretending to skills they lacked. Regulation was imperfect but present, showing recognition that medicine required training. Plague responses combined useful and futile measures. Cities ordered clean streets and quarantined ships, effective precautions, but they also rang church bells to disperse bad air. The tension between observation and tradition played out starkly during outbreaks. Some physicians noted survivors had isolated themselves, while others blamed planetary alignments. Monasteries cultivated extensive herb gardens. Rows of rosemary, sage, and thyme provided both seasoning and medicine. Infirmarians distilled these into tinctures and poultices. Some recipes survive in manuscripts with notes like "good for cough" or "eases griping pains." Modern analysis confirms many contain anti-inflammatory or antiseptic compounds. Women practiced household medicine routinely. Herbal knowledge passed mother to daughter. Kitchen physic books listed remedies for everyday ailments. Mint tea for indigestion, comfrey compresses for sprains. Gentle women often treated servants' injuries before calling expensive physicians. This domestic healing filled gaps in formal care. The Black Death spurred some innovation. Doctors noticed patterns despite flawed theories. A few realized quarantine helped, even if they attributed survival to divine whim. Some Italian cities established permanent health boards after the plague, showing willingness to learn from catastrophe. Medical books contained surprising observations. Some noted that wounds healed better when kept clean, though they blamed corrupt air rather than bacteria. Others tracked how certain herbs consistently reduce swelling or pain. While they wove these facts into humoral framework, the underlying observations were sound. Surgeons developed specialized tools. Archaeologists find carefully crafted scalpels, bone saws, and probes. Craftsmanship mattered. Clean cuts heal better. Some tools resemble modern implements in form and function. A Parisian surgeon's kit from 1300 contains recognizable forceps and retractors. Pain management had limits but existed. Alcohol numbed patients before procedures. Opium derivatives induced sleep. Some texts advised discussing procedures beforehand so patients could mentally prepare. An early form of psychological care amidst physical suffering. The fading stain of a poultice on linen marks when knowledge met need. Some treatments failed, others succeeded despite misunderstanding. Like children solving math problems with incorrect methods, but right answers, medieval medicine stumbled onto effectiveness at times. A farmer peels back the bandage to check the healing wound underneath. The village wise woman had treated it with honey and yarrow. It smells clean, looks pink at the edges. Across the field, his neighbor argues with the Lord Steward about grain rights. Another kind of healing needing attention. 7. Peasant's quiet power. The farmer stands before the manor court, his cap twisted in calloused hands. He cites an old charter, granting villagers the right to gather fallen wood in the Lord's forest. This interaction contradicts the image of silent serfs, bowing to absolute authority. Medieval peasants had more avenues to assert their rights than we often assume. Manor court records show frequent disputes between lords and tenants. In 1327, Essex, a group of villagers successfully argued that their ancestors' agreement allowed fishing in the Lord's pond. These weren't rebellions, but legal proceedings within an accepted system. Tenants paid fines if they lost cases, but the very existence of these appeals proves negotiation happened. Ancient customs carried weight. Villagers might have hereditary rights to graze animals on common land or collect firewood from specific copses. These privileges weren't grants of lordly generosity, but recognized entitlements. A Berkshire charter from 1301 specifies exactly how many pigs each family could pasture in the woods. Such precision suggests long-standing agreements rather than arbitrary permission. Peasants sued lords directly. In 1294, tenants of Wakefield Manor took their lord to court over excessive grain taxes. They won. Surviving court rolls document similar cases across England. Millers challenging monopoly rents, farmers contesting unfair labor demands. The system allowed for redress, however unequal the power balance might appear. The Black Death shifted dynamics dramatically. When population plummeted, surviving laborers gained bargaining power. Essex workers in 1351 collectively refused to work for pre-plague wages, despite new laws trying to cap earnings. Landlords desperate for tenants offered better terms, lower rents, fixed-term leases rather than servile obligations. Peasants didn't just accept these changes, They actively negotiated them. Serfdom wasn't absolute bondage. Many so-called serfs could buy, sell land, marry freely, and travel with permission. What constrained them most were financial obligations, marriage taxes, inheritance fees payable to the lord. Even these were sometimes negotiated downward. A Durham serf in 1312 paid half the usual fine for his daughter's wedding after pleading poverty convincingly. Village bylaws show self-governance. Communities regulated crop rotation, pasture access, and fence maintenance through elected jurors. These men decided disputes between neighbors over straying livestock or damaged crops. Lords rarely interfered with these local customs unless their own interests were affected. The system allowed peasants considerable autonomy in daily affairs. Women asserted property rights too. Widows regularly appeared in court defending their dower lands against grasping relatives or lords. Some became prosperous enough to lend money. A Norfolk woman named Alice de Brighton appears in 1320s records both as a borrower and lender, demonstrating unexpected financial independence for a peasant. Collective action happened regularly. Villagers sometimes banded together to refuse unjust taxes or labor demands. In 1327, peasants in Walsham-le-Willows collectively withheld harvest work until the lord reduced their obligation. These weren't revolts, but coordinated bargaining tactics exploiting the lord's need for their labor. Famine periods tested these rights. When food grew scarce, lords often tried to tighten controls, but desperate times could also force concessions. During the Great Famine of 1315 to 17, some landlords temporarily waived rents to keep tenants from abandoning their holdings. Survival required flexibility on both sides. Peasants exploited legal loopholes. Clever villagers discovered ways around restrictions without outright defiance. Some converted labor obligations to cash payments, then used the money to hire others to do the work. Others forgot to perform certain duties until the Lord Steward reminded them, buying time. Passive resistance wore down enforcement. Land transfers reveal hidden agency. Peasants bought, sold, and leased land among themselves, despite theoretical restrictions. Court rolls show complex transactions. A yard land subdivided, a meadow shared between cousins. Such deals required careful record keeping and mutual trust among villagers. Religion provided leverage. Villagers sometimes invoked biblical justice against oppressive lords. In 1328, Sussex, peasants quoted scripture about fair weights and measures when contesting the manor's oversized grain bushel. While church authorities mostly supported the social hierarchy, moral arguments could sway local decisions. The peasant experience varied enormously. A serf on a tightly controlled domain might have less freedom than a freeholder in a prosperous wool-growing region, but even the most oppressed often had some recognized rights: to inherit their father's house, to graze a cow on the common, to appeal excessive punishments. Harvest homes showed reciprocal obligations. After gathering the Lord's crops, villagers expected feasts with meat and ale. When a Lincolnshire lord skimped in 1332, workers the next year left grain standing in protest. Such traditions acknowledged that labor deserved compensation beyond bare subsistence. Migration proved an option. Despite restrictions, peasants sometimes moved to towns or other manors seeking better terms. The growth of medieval cities depended partly on this slow bleed of dissatisfied villagers. Lords complained about labor shortages caused by departures, showing the limits of their control. education existed in unexpected places. Some peasants learned enough law to draft petitions or wills. A Yorkshire shepherd named John Roan in 1329 left a surprisingly sophisticated will dividing his sheep among relatives. Literacy wasn't common, but practical legal knowledge spread through village networks. The famous peasant revolts were just visible peaks beneath surface calm. Constant low-level negotiation unfolded in thousands of manor courts across Europe. Most never made chronicles, but their records survive in dusty parchments. Requests, complaints, compromises that shaped daily life. The farmer finishes his case. The steward consults faded court rolls, finds the old wood gathering right, and rules in his favor. No one cheers. This is routine business. As the next case begins, the farmer nods to his neighbor. They'll celebrate later with ale at the harvest feast already being prepared. The hayricks stand golden in the afternoon sun, soon to feed animals that keep the manor running through winter. Laughter and fiddle music drift from the courtyard where trestle tables groan under roast meats and fresh bread. Everyone will eat well tonight, the Lord to show his generosity, the peasants to confirm their place in the cycle of mutual obligation. The dancing will last until the stars appear over fields that feed master and man alike. A minstrel tunes his lute by the fire, ready to sing songs older than any living memory. The stories will tell of lords and ladies, yes, but also cunning peasants who outwitted the devil and greedy abbots. When the children beg for another tale, he smiles and begins a new one, about a shepherd who became mayor through wit alone. The flames cast moving shadows on faces that have known hunger, but also moments like this. Tomorrow brings more work, more negotiations, more struggles small and large. But tonight, under the same moon that lights castle and cottage, there is music and the comfort of shared tradition. Darkness falls softly over the manor, where even the humblest serf knows some things cannot be taken from him. The right to rest after labor, to celebrate after harvest, to argue his case when custom is on his side. The Lord retires to his chambers, the peasants to their cottages, all bound together in a system more complex than simple domination. Across the fields, a Mongol horseman tends his ponies under the same stars, preparing to offer fermented mare's milk to a visiting clan. His people understand reciprocity too, though their customs differ. The night air carries the faint scent of leather and steppe grass as he fills 2 bowls with a creamy white drink, one for himself, one for his guest. 8. Feasts and fiddles. The minstrel plucks a string on his lute, adjusting the peg until the note rings true. Firelight flickers across his face as the hall fills with villagers. This scene contradicts the stereotype of medieval life as unrelieved grimness. Across Europe, people found moments of joy woven through their difficult lives. Weddings lasted for days. The bride and groom processed through town with musicians leading the way. Tables groaned under spiced wine, roast meats, and sweet wafers. In wealthy households, entertainment might include trained bears or fire eaters. Even peasant weddings featured dancing until dawn. Church courts sometimes had to reprimand couples for excessive celebration. Harvest brought communal dancing. After the last sheaf was cut, villagers formed circles in fields or churchyards. Fiddles and pipes played reels while children wove through the crowd. These weren't just distractions. They reinforced community ties after months of hard labor. Some dances imitated farming actions, like sowing, or threshing. Market days offered diversions alongside trade. Acrobats tumbled in open spaces while shoppers watched. Storytellers gathered crowds with tales of romance or adventure. Puppet shows made children laugh with crude humor. In French towns, trained monkeys performed tricks for coins. The line between commerce and entertainment was often blurred. Mummers' plays traveled between villages. Actors wore masks and colorful costumes to perform old stories. The plots mixed Christian themes with pagan remnants. Heroes fought dragons or death himself before being revived miraculously. Audiences cheered the loudest for comic characters who mocked authority figures. Inns served as social hubs. Travelers shared news over ale while locals played dice or chess. Some taverns kept musical instruments for patrons to use. Drinkers sang ballads about famous outlaws or tragic lovers. Games of chance sometimes got too rowdy. Town records note fines for disruptive gambling. Seasonal festivals marked the year. May Day saw villages erect flower-covered poles for dancing. At midsummer, bonfires lit up the night, while people leapt over the flames for luck. Winter brought masked processions where identities could be temporarily forgotten. These celebrations often absorbed older pagan customs into Christian frameworks. Noble households employed professional entertainers. Minstrels knew hundreds of songs by heart. Jesters used humor to comment on court politics safely. Some lords kept dwarves or albinos as curiosities to amuse guests. The best performers traveled between castles, carrying news along with their art. Music filled many spaces. Workers sang field songs with call and response verses. Women chanted while spinning or sewing together. Monasteries echoed with plain song at regular hours. Even street vendors developed musical cries to advertise their goods. The soundscape was richer than silent depictions suggest. Children played games we'd recognize. Archaeologists find wooden dolls, miniature weapons, and carved animals in medieval rubbish pits. Boys wrestled or played marbles in churchyards. Girls bounced balls against walls in rhythmic patterns. Adults sometimes joined in. Accounts mention priests playing blind man's buff with parish youth. Gambling was widespread despite bans. Chess and backgammon boards appear in art and literature. Dice games tempted all classes, with some players losing entire estates. Cards arrived in Europe late in the 1300s, quickly becoming popular. Authorities condemned gambling, but rarely stopped it completely. Tournaments offered spectacle. Knights jousted before cheering crowds, their armor polished to dazzle. Between matches, vendors sold snacks and souvenirs. Lucky spectators might catch favors tossed by ladies in the stands. These events combined sport, romance, and political theater in equal measure. Food itself brought pleasure. Spices like pepper and cinnamon flavored special dishes. Fruit tarts sweetened holiday tables. Ale and wine flowed freely at celebrations. Even peasants saved treats like honey or nuts for feast days. The first bite of fresh bread after winter grew must have tasted miraculous. Drinking customs varied by region. English alehouses encouraged communal singing. German taverns served beer in enormous shared vessels. French vintners boasted of local vineyards. Mediterranean towns sipped wine mixed with herbs and spices. Intoxication was common, but not always condemned. Moderation was the ideal, not abstinence. Courtship had playful elements. Young people met at wells or church porches to talk. Gifts like ribbons or carved boxes expressed affection. Some villages held love days where maids could choose husbands openly. Songs and poems advised proper conduct while acknowledging human desires. Humor flourished in surprising places. Margins of prayer books contained crude doodles mocking clergy. Cathedral carvings sometimes feature comic scenes beneath solemn statues. Travelers told jokes about stupid peasants that peasants themselves retold with different victims. Laughter softened life's edges at every social level. Artisans competed playfully. Masons hid caricatures in stonework where only colleagues would spot them. Weavers incorporated subversive patterns into noble garments. Potters shaped jugs with faces that made drinkers smile. Even serious crafts contained moments of whimsy for those who knew where to look. Night brought different pleasures. Families gathered around hearths to mend tools and tell stories. Inns filled with travelers sharing tales from distant places. Students debated philosophy by candlelight. The darkness didn't necessarily mean silence or fear, unless circumstances were dire. Church authorities often complained about these activities. Bishops denounced dancing in graveyards. Town councils banned certain games. Moralists wrote against excessive laughter or stylish clothing. Their constant scolding proves how stubbornly people clung to their joys. These pleasures weren't evenly distributed. The poor worked harder for shorter celebrations. The sick might only hear music drifting through their window. But relief from suffering existed, even if temporary. A day's laughter didn't erase hardship, but made it bearable. The minstrel begins his song about a clever peasant who tricks a greedy abbot. Firelight reflects off listening faces, some smiling, some thoughtful. Tomorrow, they'll return to labor, but tonight, they share this moment. The melody rises and falls, like the breaths of sleeping children in nearby cottages. Incense drifts from the castle chapel, where evening prayers have ended. The scent mingles with wood smoke and roasted meat. Far to the east, beyond these stone walls, a Mongol horseman pours fermented mare's milk into 2 bowls. One for himself, one for his guest. Their traditions differ, but the impulse to share refreshment after a long day crosses all cultures. The steppe wind carries the sharp, tangy smell of the drink as the horseman offers it with both hands. This gesture matters more than the liquid itself, a sign of trust between potential rivals. His guest accepts without hesitation, knowing refusal would insult his host. Around them, other riders prepare tents shaped like the dome of heaven itself. Neunte Steppe, hospitality code. The Mongol elder extends the bowl of arag with both hands, his fingers curled around the rim in the customary way. The fermented mare's milk smells sharp, slightly sour, with a lingering sweetness beneath. He holds it out to his guest, waiting. This simple act carries weight. Not just a drink, but a promise. The steppe might seem harsh to outsiders, but its people built an unspoken code around hospitality that shaped politics, survival, and trust. Nomadic life demanded reciprocity. On the open plains, there were no inns, no markets to resupply. Travelers depended on the generosity of those they met. A guest granted shelter one night might become a host the next. The rules were strict. Anyone approaching a tent received food and drink before questions were asked. Even enemies were offered a meal before discussions turned to conflict. Refusing hospitality was unthinkable, an insult to the giver and a breach of tradition. Summer gatherings under felt tents showcased this ethic. Clans met at seasonal pastures, setting up their jars in wide circles, the air filled with the scent of roasting mutton and boiled milk tea. Elders shared news, while children played games between the tents. Every visitor, whether kin or stranger, was invited inside. The host's wife prepared a meal: dried curds, fresh bread, perhaps strips of meat from a recently slaughtered sheep. Portions were generous, even if supplies were low. To stint was to shame oneself. Winter tested these customs. When snow buried the grasslands and winds howled across the plains, survival hinged on cooperation. A lone traveler caught in a storm could freeze without shelter. Families took turns hosting, sharing their hearths and what little food remained. A single leg of mutton might be boiled thin to feed a dozen mouths. The broth stretched with wild onions or dried roots. No one ate until all was served. The eldest received the first portion, the youngest the last. Order mattered as much as the meal. Milk tea sealed alliances. When two clans sought peace, their leaders sat cross-legged on felt rugs, cups in hand. The drink was salty, buttery, warmed over a low fire. Sipping it together signaled goodwill, a shared taste binding the drinkers to their word. Delegates from distant tribes carried bricks of pressed tea as gifts, knowing its value surpassed gold. The ritual was slow, deliberate. Rushing implied distrust. Cups were refilled without asking, hands extended in steady arcs. The system relied on memory. A kindness shown decades earlier might be repaid generations later. Tales circulated of warriors spared in battle because their grandfathers once shared a meal. Survival wasn't just physical, it was social. Trust woven through these acts kept the peace across thousands of miles. The elder offering Eric today might need shelter tomorrow. The guest accepting it knew the debt ran both ways. Children learned the rules early. A boy serving drinks to visitors practiced holding the cup correctly. Never one-handed, always supporting the base. A girl stirring the communal pot knew to scrape the bottom so none burned. Games mimicked adult courtship. Girls offered tiny cups of watered-down tea, while boys pretended to be honored guests. Laughter mingled with lessons. By adolescence, everyone understood the consequences of rudeness. A clumsy refusal could fracture alliances before they formed. Stories emphasized the cost of breaking faith. Legends told of hosts who poisoned enemies at their tables, only to be cursed by the spirits. Songs warned against withholding food during famine. Those who hoarded found their herds stricken, their tents empty. The moral was clear. Hospitality wasn't optional. The winds erased pride as easily as footprints. Only cooperation endured. Ceremonies reinforced the message. When a bride joined her husband's clan, she presented bowls of tea to his relatives, bowing as each accepted. At funerals, mourners shared a final meal with the deceased spirit, laying out favorite dishes beside the body. Every life event circled back to giving and receiving. Death itself couldn't sever the bond. Politics moved at the pace of these rituals. Khans summoned rivals not to throne rooms, but to feasts. Ambassadors sampled local delicacies before discussing treaties. The table became the negotiating ground. Heated words cooled by steaming broth. Grudges softened by sweetened curds. Decisions made over food held more weight than those stamped on parchment. A full stomach encouraged patience, and patience allowed compromise. The system wasn't perfect. Some abused it, arriving uninvited to drain a family's stores. Others manipulated tradition, using shared meals to lull foes into vulnerability. but breaches were rare. The code held because it had to. Without it, the step would have fractured into warring fragments. Instead, a network of mutual obligations stretched from the Altai Mountains to the Danube. Trade flourished under these rules. Caravans crossing the grasslands relied on herders for guidance and rest. Merchants paid for shelter with bolts of silk or bags of grain, but the underlying exchange was deeper, a pledge of safety in return for respect. The same trails carried more than goods. They carried trust, slow built over generations. The elder watches his guest sip the arag. The man's face tightens at the sour tang, but he drinks deeply, returning the bowl with both hands as custom demands. The elder nods. This stranger understands. Beyond the tent, the wind tugs at the felt walls, but inside, the fire burns steady. They will talk now of grazing rights or marriages or forgotten debts. The drink has smoothed the way. Somewhere beyond this camp, a horse trots across frozen ground, its rider clutching a banner. The wind snaps the silk, revealing a crimson falcon. Messages travel fast on the steppe, carried by those who know each watering hole, each family willing to share warmth. The horse's breath mists in the air as it crests a ridge. Ahead lies another tent, another offered cup. The bowstrings twang snap sharply against the silence. A young woman tests the tension, her fingertips calloused from practice. Behind her, the camp prepares for a wedding. Guests arrive with bundles of felt and skins. Steam rises from cooking pots. Soon, there will be wrestling matches, songs, endless toasts. But first, she must prove her aim. The target stands 40 paces off, its painted circles bright against the grass. She draws, releases. The arrow flies straight. Not every culture valued female warriors. Hers does. The Mongols remember the names of fighting women long after other empires forgot them. One in particular rides through history unmatched, a princess who demanded suitors face her in combat. Her story begins like this: dust rising, crowds gathering, a challenge shouted across the battlefield. The boldest step forward, the rest watch, holding their breath. 10. The wrestler princess. The wrestler princess plants her knee between her opponent's shoulder blades, pressing his face into the dust. The crowd erupts. Some cheer, others mutter about improper behavior. She ignores them. This match follows her rules. The man beneath her is no random challenger, but a noble suitor hoping to win her hand. She made the terms clear: defeat her in combat or leave empty-handed. He had laughed at first. He isn't laughing now. Kutulun, granddaughter of the Mongol ruler Kaidu, lived in a world where most chroniclers ignored women's deeds. Yet Marco Polo devoted an entire chapter to her in his travels. She stood out not just for her skill, but for using physical prowess as political leverage. On the steppe, riding and archery were survival skills for all, but Kutulum took it further. She turned strength into a language rulers had to respect. Her marriage conditions seemed simple enough. Any noble who wanted to wed her had to beat her at wrestling. The prize for losing was 100 horses. Polo records that she won over 10,000 animals this way. The number might be exaggerated, but the practice wasn't. Mongol women often had more marital choice than their sedentary counterparts, yet Kutulun pushed boundaries further. She didn't just accept or reject suitors. She humiliated unprepared ones publicly. The wrestling matches served multiple purposes. They filtered out weak contenders, certainly, but they also demonstrated her continued independence after marriage. A man who couldn't dominate her physically couldn't expect to control her politically either, in a realm where alliances shifted like desert winds. Personal capability mattered as much as family ties. Her battlefield record reinforced this. Kaidu, embroiled in conflicts with Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty, entrusted her with troops. Polo describes her leading raids, directing maneuvers, and fighting beside her warriors. She didn't hide behind bodyguards or command from tents. When messengers brought battle plans, they addressed her directly rather than her husband. Mongol society allowed women more martial roles than neighboring cultures. Girls learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Bows were sized for smaller frames, but even among her people, Kutulun was exceptional. Other noble women might supervise camps while men fought. She moved with the front lines. Her presence became tactical. Opponents who assumed a woman would be weak found their formations crumbling under her assaults. Marco Polo likely emphasized her story because it shocked European audiences. To readers who expected delicate ladies embroidering in castles, a wrestling princess leading armies seemed fantastical. But Polo presented her matter-of-factly, noting her skills without dwelling on gender. His account suggests that among Mongols, her abilities drew admiration more than scandal. The horse economy deepened her influence. Each herd won from defeated suitors increased her wealth. Horses meant mobility, status, wartime advantage. With 100 mounts, she could equip retainers or trade for supplies. Over years, these accumulated winnings gave her resources beyond typical noble allowances. Polo mentions her personally distributing animals to warriors who pleased her. Another power usually reserved for Khans. Marriage didn't diminish her. After finally taking a husband, one persistent enough to win, she remained active in campaigns. Sources describe her consulting on troop movements and settling disputes between commanders. Her husband appears mostly as a background figure. It's her name that surfaces repeatedly in military contexts. Her legend endured in oral traditions. Long after her death, Central Asian storytellers recounted episodes of her daring. Some accounts claim she once rescued her father by charging through enemy lines disguised as a soldier. Others tell of her scouting territory disguised as a refugee, memorizing fortifications beneath ragged robes. The details blur with retelling, but the core remains. A woman who shaped events through strength and cunning. The steppes' gender norms weren't equal by modern standards. Men still dominated most governance, yet physical ability carried its own hierarchy, and Kutulon climbed it. In societies where life demanded constant resilience, proven competence often outweighed tradition. A woman who could rally warriors and outfight rivals earned respect no edict could grant. Her story contradicts assumptions about historical women's passivity. We imagine medieval noble women as political pawns, traded between families. Kutulon wrote her own marital terms, where others see only oppression in the past. Her life suggests niches existed for those fierce enough to claim them. The wrestling mythos served her beyond matches. By making her body part of diplomatic discourse, she forced men to engage on her terms. A delegate couldn't just flatter her with words. He had to grapple with her reality. The physicality cut through posturing and revealed character quickly. Kaidu's reliance on her speaks volumes. In later rebellions, he positioned her as both strategist and symbol. Her presence at councils lent legitimacy to decisions. Warriors who might have questioned orders from softer nobles followed her without hesitation. she embodied the martial ideals Mongols prized. Climate played a role in this flexibility. On the arid steppe, everyone's labor was needed for survival. Women who could handle herds while men hunted or raided held tangible value. Harsh landscapes breed pragmatic social structures. When blizzards kill indiscriminately, rigid gender roles become luxuries few can afford. European visitors often misinterpreted what they saw. They labeled Mongol women coarse for doing work their own ladies considered beneath them. They missed the quiet empowerment in shared burdens. Kutulun stood out not solely because she fought, but because she leveraged fighting into sustained authority. The inheritance system also helped. Mongol lands passed to younger sons, leaving older siblings to forge their own paths. This created openings for enterprising individuals regardless of sex. Kutulun's marital winnings functioned like an inheritance, resources independent of birth order. Records hint she could read and write, rare skills among steppe elites. This perhaps explains her administrative role in later life. Managing campaigns required tracking supplies and coordinating messengers. Literacy would have amplified her natural leadership. Polo's account ends abruptly, leaving her fate unclear. Some scholars think she died in battle. Others suggest she retired to oversee her herds. What's certain is that her peers remembered her. In a civilization that prized oral history, making the archives was deliberate. The Mongols could have erased her from records as outsiders often did, with unconventional women. They chose preservation instead. The deeper lesson lies beyond individual triumph. Kutulun society didn't categorize strength as inherently male. Physical prowess was a personal attribute, not a gendered one. Boys might train longer, but girls weren't barred from the practice grounds. This neutrality created space for exceptions to flourish. Modern excavations support such flexibility. Grave finds across Mongolia show women buried with bows and armor. Some tombs contain riding gear alongside cosmetics, reminders that martial roles didn't preclude femininity as contemporaries elsewhere assumed. The princess's legend echoes in small ways today. Kazakh and Kyrgyz girls still learn horseback wrestling, a shadow of her legacy. Folk songs reference her without naming her. Tales of the Khan's daughter who threw strong men. Museums display reconstructed armor fitted to female frames, challenging visitor assumptions. Yet she wasn't alone in her time. Other steppe women commanded troops or governed when husbands were at war. Russian chronicles mention Tatar queens leading invasions. What makes Kutulun unique is documentation. Marco Polo's account froze her in amber, while peers faded into oral tradition. The wrestling matches symbolize larger truths. On those dusty flats, before crowds of warriors, Kutulun demonstrated that power could be taken as well as given. Each victory reinforced her autonomy. Every horse added to her herds was a choice preserved, a voice undiminished. Silk flutters down from a merchant stall in Osaka, catching the light before settling on packed earth, half a continent away from the steppe. Another story of defiance unfolds. Here too, unconventional figures shape history, though their weapons differ. Their determination mirrors the wrestler princess's own. The cloth sways gently, its threads weaving patterns older than kingdoms. Osaka's last stand. The fuse smolders as the samurai touches fire to the siege engine's powder. Sparks crawl along the cord toward bundled explosives. Around him, Osaka Castle's defenders brace for impact. This moment in 1615 marks more than just another battle. It's the end of an era. The medieval Japan of swords and honor clashes violently with the approaching age of gunpowder and absolute rule. For centuries, samurai warriors had dominated Japanese warfare. Their curved blades and elaborate armor symbolized personal skill and loyalty. But as the 1300s gave way to the 1600s, firearms arrived with Portuguese traders. At first, they seemed crude, noisy, slow, inelegant, yet their ability to pierce armor from a distance gradually changed tactics. By the time Toyotomi Hideyori made his final stand at Osaka Castle, guns had reshaped entire armies. Hideyori's rebellion was doomed from the start. His father, the warlord Hideyoshi, had unified Japan years earlier. After his death, power shifted to Tokugawa Ieyasu. Young Hideyori grew up in Osaka Castle, surrounded by loyalists who saw him as the rightful heir. When tensions erupted into war, he became the rallying point for those resisting Tokugawa rule. His cause wasn't hopeless, just tragically mistimed. Sanada Yukimura emerged as the rebellion's brightest strategist. His crimson armor made him easy to spot on the battlefield. A deliberate choice. He wanted allies to see him holding the line against impossible odds. His tactical brilliance stalled Tokugawa forces for months. At Osaka's outer forts, his men dug concealed trenches and positioned snipers. They used the castle's intricate waterways to move troops unseen. These weren't the acts of desperate men, but calculated resistance. The castle itself was a marvel of medieval engineering. Its stone walls rose sheer from deep moats. The innermost compound sat atop layered embankments designed to confuse attackers. Underground passages connected key points for swift reinforcement. But these defenses, built decades earlier, weren't designed with cannons in mind. When Tokugawa dragged artillery into position, cracks appeared in seemingly impenetrable ramparts. Firearms forced both sides to adapt. Samurai traditionally opened battles with archery volleys before closing for sword combat. Guns disrupted this rhythm. Now engagements began at greater distances, with formations prioritizing cover over heroic charges. Osaka's defenders learned to time rushes between enemy reloads. They also crammed older matchlock guns with extra powder, turning them into close-range grenades when necessary. Merchants inside the castle walls kept careful records of supplies. Their ledgers showed desperate creativity. Saltpeter extracted from urine, metal scraps melted down for bullets. Artisans modified armor with thicker plates over vital areas. Even courtesans trained with naginata blades to defend inner chambers. The entire complex became a living organism, adjusting hourly to threats outside. The siege wore on through winter into spring. Tokugawa forces tightened their grip, cutting supply lines. Inside Osaka, food dwindled, yet discipline held remarkably long. Warriors continued polishing their armor each morning, as if expecting victory. Tea ceremonies still occurred at appointed hours, offering brief calm. This persistence of routine amid chaos hints at the psychological anchors holding the defense together. Assaults came in waves. Tokugawa troops tested different sections of wall, probing for weaknesses. At one breached gate, defenders stacked enemy corpses like sandbags to slow their advance. Elsewhere, they redirected moat water to flood tunnels dug by attackers. Each small success bought time, though ultimately not enough. Yukimura's final charge became legendary. Knowing the battle lost, he led a deliberate strike toward Tokugawa Ieyasu's command post. His red armor sliced through enemy lines like a fiery blade. Some accounts claim he nearly reached Ieyasu before falling. Whether true or not, the story persists because it captures samurai ideals, skill, daring, loyalty beyond reason. Fire ultimately decided Osaka's fate. Tokugawa cannon set the castle town ablaze, flames spreading inward. Defenders scrambled simultaneously to fight fires and attackers. The smoke grew so thick that breathing required wet cloths over faces. In these final hours, the medieval and early modern worlds collided brutally. Archers firing through gun smoke, swordsmen clashing with musket-equipped infantry. Surrender terms came with bitter conditions. Hideyori's supporters urged him to fight on, but civilian casualties mounted. The young lord chose to spare his people, signing a peace agreement. Yet Tokugawa, distrusting the Toyotomi lineage, soon violated the terms. Hideyori took his own life as flames consumed the castle keep. His death extinguished the last major resistance to Tokugawa rule. Ironically, the shogunate that crushed Osaka would later idealize samurai virtues while ruthlessly suppressing actual warfare. The battle's aftermath revealed changing values. Tokugawa commanders collected enemy heads as trophies, but with less ceremony than past conflicts. Firearms had commoditized death. Where once a duel might decide a clash, now volume of fire mattered more. Veterans of Osaka noted how younger warriors prioritized marksmanship over swordsmanship. The intimate connection between combatants frayed with each gunshot. Records from the period show fascinating details. Blacksmiths petitioned for more metal to repair guns rather than swords. Armor designs shifted to deflect bullets instead of arrows. Even battlefield poetry evolved, with verses referencing gun smoke alongside cherry blossoms. These small shifts marked the medieval receding, the early modern advancing. Osaka's defenders knew they likely couldn't win, yet they fought with a determination that transcended calculation. Their resistance wasn't just about territory, it was about preserving a way of life becoming obsolete. In their stubborn courage, medieval Japan made its last spectacular exit. As the castle burned, peculiar moments unfolded. A group of musicians played gagaku court music amid the chaos. Priests conducted final rites for fallen warriors, while arrows still flew. These weren't acts of denial, but affirmations. Even in collapse, certain rhythms demanded honoring. The Tokugawa shogunate would rule Japan for over 250 years after Osaka's fall. Their peace came at a cost. Strict caste systems, suppressed dissent, isolation from foreign influence. The vibrant chaos of medieval Japan gave way to rigid order. Yet visiting Osaka's rebuilt castle today, one senses echoes beneath the stones. Cherry petals drift across the reconstructed battlements each spring, the same variety that fell in 1615. They settle lightly where blood once soaked the earth, neither celebrating nor condemning, simply marking time's passage. The past wasn't simpler, just differently complex. Beneath modernity's surface, older currents still flow, waiting for attentive listeners. Night falls gently over the castle grounds. Somewhere beyond the walls, a traveler pauses to watch fireflies mimic long extinguished matchlock flashes. Tomorrow will bring its own struggles, its own joys. For now, there is only this hushed moment, the same stars overhead that witnessed history's turning points, the same air breathed by warriors and poets alike. Rest comes easier knowing how much has endured. 12th conclusion. The past wasn't simpler, just differently complex. They faced hunger, war, and uncertainty. just as we do, but with different tools to meet those challenges. Their lives were woven with rituals and rhythms we've forgotten. Small comforts in a world without guarantees. There's peace in remembering their resilience. Let this thought loosen your grip on today's worries. Whatever troubles you now worry them too. Reshaped by centuries, but rooted in the same human hopes. Breathe slowly, like they did when the candles burned low. The night sky they studied still holds the same stars. Sleep now, as they did, under that silent watch. Rest comes easier knowing how much endures.